We are Cactus Wrestling, and today we're going to debate, should there be a push-out point in Folkstyle wrestling?
Okay, my rule change is actually one that I don't even agree with, so maybe you guys, after talking, will be able to change my mind. But the rule I'm proposing is currently a rule in freestyle wrestling in which if you push a guy out and you step out of bounds, you get a point. And that's not currently a part of Folkstyle wrestling. And I think it should stay out of folkstyle wrestling, but I know that there's some movement at least, or some discussions at least, for people saying that it should be implemented.
I do like the idea of it because I hate watching the guys that love hanging out near the out of bounds line, so that way when a guy shoots in on them, they can just kind of, oh, we're out of bounds, you can't score, haha. Like I hate watching that. So I like that it would kind of promote a guy not wanting to hang out there for the risk of losing a point because of it. And I mean, it is what the rest of the world does. I know it's slightly different rules for international, but still, like I think it could be a good implementation. I'd like to at least see it implemented, and then if it didn't work out with the rest of folk style rules, then maybe it could get kicked out. But I'd like to see maybe an exhibition match with those rules or something, or a series of exhibition matches like that.
I mean, I think that it's a good rule. I like it for freestyle. I like it for Greco. A lot of these top guys, anyway, want to wrestle. They always talk about, my dream is to win the Nationals, is to win the Olympic gold. And I think getting more familiar with the style that everyone else already uses in the world earlier is better.
Yeah.
That being said, just like off of what Mike was saying, a lot of guys like to hang it on that edge, and I think that if you get, dinged for, hanging there and be like, ha ha ha, I'm over here. A push-out point, just to kind of set them straight. It's not a crazy big point. It's worth as much as an escape.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to be that determines a match, but I also think it'll, force more action.
I mean, it could determine a match. At one point, I got you out of bounds. Like, it can be the difference maker, but...
Here's my biggest problem with it, is I think there's two different styles of wrestling. You have the folk style and the freestyle and the Greco. Okay, freestyle and Greco, they're much more exposure-based, whereas folk style is more control-based. So we wouldn't be able to see those kind of funky type scrambles that don't exist in freestyle because you'd be giving up points. We wouldn't be able to see that near the edge if this was implemented. Well, the reason that it's not a problem in freestyle is because no one's doing these funk rolls as defensive maneuvers. Because you're giving up points in that way, because folk style is all about control, whereas freestyle is exposure. So I think that it's just kind of counterintuitive to the style of wrestling that's being at hand. I think it works well for freestyle because it's more about, like I said, exposure. I don't necessarily think it works for folk style.
But isn't the rule for freestyle and Greco, like if like you're down towards the mat and you go out of bounds, there's no point school. But if, like, I have your leg up in the air and I run you out of bounds, then it is a point. So the rule you'd be implementing for folk style would be the same that it is for freestyle. So, like, if someone dove down into a scramble position, that would be down on the mat, in which case if they went out of bounds, that wouldn't be a point.
Yeah, so they call it grounding. It's a little bit more vague than that. Basically, if I'm on a sprawl and I'm hanging on you, sprawling, and then you just push me out of bounds, that's no point. But if, like, we're rolling and my hand touches, that's possibly 1 point. So I can see where Jack's coming from, but I also think that the grounding rule that Mike brought up would help kind of negate that a little bit.
Yeah.
So it is kind of a middle ground area, though.
Yeah, and I'm not as familiar with the freestyle rules, so if there is some sort of caveat for grounding, like you guys are saying, then I think it starts to make a little bit more sense, because I do agree with the concepts that you guys are bringing up, where you want to promote more activity in the center of the mat, and if there's that threat of there being a push-out rule if you step out, I think, Mike, at one point you said it, like, we already have a stalling warning for being driven. If you take a shot and you get driven out of bounds, maybe that kind of gets morphed into it. Maybe if you get shot out of bounds, instead of a stalling call, maybe it's a push out point instead, something like that. I could get a little bit more on board with that if there's that kind of grounding caveat to allow for the funky type scrambles that everyone loves to watch.
From that perspective, I don't want to lose like those funky scrambles like you talked about.
Yeah.
But obviously, like freestyle itself does have a lot of really crazy positions that people love to watch. It's about finding that kind of, again, like middle ground between freestyle and folk style, and how can we bring what's great about this, what's great about that, and kind of combine them together.
Yeah, the more overlapping rules, the better.
Yeah, without losing what makes either of those great.
Yeah.
And so like you talked about, like maybe they would have to modify it a little bit so that way it's more for like folk style wrestling, where they have like that grounding rule, and they also have like continued action out of bounds. Like if they're having a great scramble, and they're both guys are fighting hard for position, and then one guy's fingernail touches, you're like, oh, that's a point. That kind of defeats the purpose.
that would be ridiculous. I'd be up in arms about that.
Yeah, and then John Smith throws the challenge brick because that's his thing.
But do you think that the push out point negates kind of wanting to go for a takedown? Because if I can get 2 push outs, that's the same as a takedown. Like,
yeah, but guys are usually good at circling away. Like, if you're just pushing forward, most guys don't just go backward into out of bounds. So, like, especially if a point's on the line now, you'd have to really just let yourself get bullied into that point.
And to kind of like circle back is like we talked about, if you just backed straight out of bounds anyway, even in the current rules, that would already be a stall and then a potential 1 point anyway.
Yeah.
So you can't, like, guys know not to be just back straight up. They know they have to circle back in.
Yeah. This would just encourage that even more.
Yeah.
I could see there being a potential issue with kind of replays and challenges and being like, oh, no, I stepped out first, or the opponent stepped out first. It wasn't me that stepped. Like, if both guys are going out of bounds, the brick's going to be thrown in, then it kind of takes away from like the intensity of the match because we're going to have to stop and review it and see which one.
You only have so many like the coaches only can challenge.
I know, but if they challenge and they're correct, they get it back, don't they?
Yeah.
So if that keeps happening,
does it happen that frequently in freestyle? I don't think it's like a super frequent. Like every time someone goes out of bounds, they're like, "Oh, brick." Like it's not that common.
Yeah.
Well, because also just like I'd love to see. I don't know if it's the folk style rule, but if you lose a challenge in freestyle, that's a point for the other guy.
Oh yeah, I think that is a freestyle rule. Yeah.
So if Folkstyle had that and they were like, oh, that was out of bounds, like, well, do I really want to potentially waste a challenge and give them the point anyway and make it a 1 point into a 2 point?
Yeah, I think that's a good freestyle rule that negates. Negates the risk of challenge.
Yeah.
Like, you don't just throw it for the sake of throwing it because you don't want to give the other guy a point.
Right. So. Okay.
I would say maybe if you're gonna take the push out, you'd have to kind of maybe bring in the challenge rule as well. I think that if they're together, it makes it a lot better for at least my voting purpose.
Right.
Well, let's get to the vote. So, all in favor for there being some sort of implementation of a push-out rule or a push-out point in folk-style wrestling, put your thumb up. I'm like maybe middle. I was down before. I'm like maybe middle. I think there's maybe some things to iron out in terms of what that would look like. But I'm not a hard no like I was before. For what that's worth.
Progress.
Progress.
Thanks for watching. We are Cactus Wrestling, and we'll see you next time on our next video.